Okay, Adam, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Welcome to anyone who is listening in to this. I'm going to talk about the Toucan side of the Funding the Commons Hackathon, which is happening all over the world as we speak, and also in Thailand soon. I'm very excited to be coming over there. Thanks to Funding the Commons for organizing this amazing event that we're excited to be part of. So I'm just going to talk through very quickly what our challenge is within the hackathon, how we fit within the hackathon. I'm going to give a very quick intro to the real world problem relating to the climate crisis that we are trying to tackle at Toucan. I'm going to talk about the prizes that we're offering as part of this hackathon. Everyone wants to know about the prizes, of course. And I'm going to talk through some ideas for projects that could be worked on, because at Toucan we've done a lot of thinking about different ways of tackling the problem of the climate crisis through blockchain technology. And so we have a bunch of ideas that could serve as starting points for people. And I'll just give a bunch of resources that you can use if you want to look into this more deeply. And so everything I'm going to talk about is on this page that I'm sharing now, and that is linked from the main Dora Hacks page, which you can see here. So you can find a link to this page there, but I can also ensure that this is shared out again in the relevant Telegram groups for the hackathon. Okay, so let's get started. So I'll dive in with the challenge statement first of all, and then explain a bit about what it means. So the challenge statement, I'll just read it out. Propose the most novel use case or mechanism for creating new demand for carbon removal credits within Web3, focusing on utility and incentivizing large-scale adoption. Okay, so that needs a bit of explanation. So let's just take a step back a bit first, and because not everyone will know what carbon removal credits or even carbon credits in general are. So I'm not going to go kind of deep into the role of the voluntary carbon market and blockchain and its relevance to the climate crisis, because we've already had an excellent workshop from Marcus earlier in this series of workshops for the hackathon. So I've just linked to the slides for that previous workshop there. So if you want to kind of go a bit deeper into that topic, then I would strongly recommend giving that a look first. But I'll just briefly reuse the bathtub analogy, which is an old favorite in the space that a lot of people use to explain the problem. So essentially we have a bunch of emissions, largely man-made, of CO2, which are being emitted in the atmosphere. And if you think of the atmosphere as a bathtub full of that is filling up essentially with CO2 represented as water here, then we've got two tasks before us if we want to avoid global warming becoming unmanageably high. And so the one task is to reduce emissions, which is just basically turning off the tap. And the other one is to remove water from the bathtub, or CO2 from the atmosphere. And it's generally accepted that we need to do both. Some people argue, we should just reduce emissions rather than relying on removals, because if we rely on removals, then that gives people an excuse to pollute the atmosphere more. But actually, the science shows, and the data around human behavior as well, both show that we have to do both. So we're focusing on on removals for the purposes of this hackathon, and that's Toucan's main focus at the moment as well. So the fundamental problem is we need to pay for the job of removing CO2 from the atmosphere. And there is a sort of financial construct for doing that, which is that credits are issued every time, or one credit is issued every time 1 ton of CO2 is removed from the atmosphere in a verified way. Now, verified is a key word here, and there's all kinds of complexity involved in verifying a carbon project is removing CO2 in a valid way, which and there's all kinds of important properties around how that's done. For example, permanence. You can't just remove CO2 from the atmosphere and then leak it back, a short time later, because that obviously defeats the point. So I'm not going to get into the complexities of all that. Again, Marcus's primer on previously given goes into that, but we can also share plenty of resources if you want to learn more on that, and it is referred to in our documentation as well. But let's just focus for now on the fact that 1 credit represents 1 ton of CO2 removed, and the way it works from a financial perspective is that these projects around the world that are removing CO2 from the atmosphere obviously need to get paid for their efforts, and the way they do it essentially is by getting these credits issued and then selling these credits on carbon markets. And we believe at Toucan that if you bring the on-chain element to this by tokenizing credits, we can scale up removal efforts and unlock all kinds of new use cases for carbon credits, which haven't previously been there. And that's where the hackathon comes in. So very quick bit about Toucan. First thing to note is that you can find a lot more about us on our, well, actually not just our documentation here, but I should also put, if you just remove the docs bit from the URL, just toucan.earth, of course, that's our homepage, and you can find out everything about Toucan there. So as I said, we believe that Web3 is a great way to coordinate capital at global scale. I think it's proven generally that it can do that in other contexts, and we believe it needs to be done in this context as well. And what we are primarily doing, if you had to summarize it in one sentence at the moment, is that we are tokenizing these verified removal credits, and then we're building on-chain markets, which aren't just these kind of monolithic black boxes like some markets are, but they're composable. So you can obviously, because they're on-chain, you can see everything that is happening. They're governed by smart contracts, and you can build all kinds of interesting stuff on top of them and on top of the tokens involved. Okay, so tokenization. This is the first part of that summary. So how does it work? Well, I said the word verified, and that there's a bunch of complexity around how you verify carbon credits. We're not doing that verification ourselves. We are relying on reputable registries, carbon registries, to do that, or to coordinate that verification and issue the credits off-chain. So in the case of removal credits, we have partnered with puro.earth is their website, and they are a very prominent carbon removals registry, and they provide credits from different removal projects around the world, in particular biochar credits, which I might briefly explain in a second. So you can see here on the left, we've got some biochar projects from different places around the world, and they've produced credits of different vintages, which means it's just like wine, different times of the year, or different years produce different vintages, and within each vintage there's a batch of credits that are verified and issued. So all of this is on the left-hand side is essentially taken care of by the Puro registry, And then we essentially tokenize these through a bridge and produce on-chain tokens, which we call TCO2s. Now, these are ERC20 fungible tokens, so they should be very familiar to all builders. There are some details. I mean, the bridge is quite complex, and there's actually an NFT minting stage involved before the TCO2s get minted. But you don't necessarily need to know about that. I mean, just very briefly, as part of the bridging process, these batch NFTs get minted, which have serial numbers in, so you can map the whole tokenization process back to specific serial numbers from the source registry, which in this case is Puro. But essentially, it's just carbon credits go into the bridge, and ERC20 tokens that we call TCO2s come out the other side. And by the way, this is a two-way bridge, so you can actually detokenize credits and go back the other way as well, although that might not be so relevant for this hackathon. But if you can think of ideas involving detokenization, then great. And so I'll just note that the other thing here is that there's a TCO2 token, an ERC20 token contract for each project vintage. So you can see here, project A has TCO2 has its own TCO2 token, and similarly for project B and project C, they have the corresponding on-chain tokens. Okay, so that's the bridge that we've built at Toucan. And then on top of the bridge, there's one more mechanism that is worth you knowing about, and that's a pooling mechanism. So TCO2 tokens, as I said, are ERC20s, but they are low liquidity. The supply of each TCO2 is relatively low, so you can't build kind of a liquid market around a single TCO2 token. So to solve that problem, we create these things called carbon pools, which is just essentially a basket of different TCO2s. So you can see you can deposit a TCO2 into the pool. For every ton of TCO2 you deposit, you get 1 ton of the carbon pool token here. So that's why it says 1-to-1 here. And so that groups them all together, and then this pool essentially becomes a portfolio of the different TCO2s. And from that, we can create a more liquid market for carbon removals, which in itself is quite a useful thing, because you get much better price discovery, and carbon removals suddenly become instantly accessible to anyone who wants to play in the world of DeFi. So that becomes a fundamental building block in the DeFi space. And by the way, you can think of this as another form of real world asset. People are talking quite a lot about real world assets these days, and tokenized carbon was arguably one of the first forms of real world asset around before the others started emerging. Okay, so let's get to the bits that people will be excited about, maybe. So first off, we're offering this innovation bounty, and this is very much along the lines, well, it's basically identical to the challenge, the lines of the challenge offered by Klima. So you can earn, more than 2K just by focusing on this alone, if you combine prizes from us and Klima together. And as I said, this is essentially the challenge statement from the beginning. It's about implementing innovative mechanisms for creating or facilitating new demand for carbon removal credits on chain. And obviously, since we're Toucan, we would like you to do this with the Puro TCO2 tokens. And we don't want this to be like a one-off thing. We want people to think about building sustainable on-chain markets or mechanisms that are going to be there for the long term and that can really scale up. So start small and grow the demand for these tokens over time. And remember, what's the point of growing demand for these tokens? It's because the financing of those tokens goes back to the original carbon projects, which are literally removing CO2 from the atmosphere. So by creating demand here, you are literally funding positive climate action to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, and that is the end goal of all of this. So what do you need to do to be eligible for these prizes? It's very straightforward. Of course, we want you to use our protocol. You must show an ability to increase demand for the tokens and have some plan for how to scale up. You know, as I said, if it's just a one-off, then it's not going to be nearly as compelling as something that can last for the long term. So yeah, sustainability is the name of the game. And so in addition to that 2K innovation bounty, we offer it's almost like a compensation model as well. So one thing I haven't talked about is retirement, and this is a concept that applies to carbon credits in general in the voluntary carbon market. And the idea here is that it's not enough to buy a token to say that you've contributed to positive climate action, because you could buy it, say that, and then sell it on, and it hasn't costed you anything. You haven't really funded the climate action yourself. And yeah, now the credit is in someone else's hands. So the way it works to make this a robust mechanism is that if you want to claim the positive environmental impact of these credits, then you have to mark them as retired, which is essentially pretty much the same as burning tokens. The main difference is that when you burn or retire the tokens, when you retire them, you get a certificate with some metadata that says, I claim this environmental impact for myself or for some other party that I'm retiring on behalf of. And here's the reason why I retired these credits. So it might be that you want to counterbalance some emissions from, you know, some travel you made, maybe some flights to DevCon, for example. Or maybe, you know, you're a large organization and you have a large carbon footprint and you want to, you know, after reducing as much of your carbon footprint as you can, practically, there's still some emissions left over and you want to counterbalance those by buying carbon credits and retiring them. So the retirement mechanism is key here, and I will go into that in a bit more detail in a bit, but just to finish the details of this bounty. So this is, you know, the more you can retire through the protocol, the more you can win. But this is not about retiring yourself. This is about inducing new demand and getting other people to retire through whatever you build. So it's the same criteria as the 2K bounty above, but the retirements must be linked to the hack. Obviously, it, you know, has to be related to that. And the retirements need to come from a third party. So you need to find some demand somewhere for retirements, and demand does exist out there, but the ideas I'm going to go through will hopefully help unlock new demand. Okay, so getting onto the ideas. I'm not going to go, there's quite a lot here, and I don't think I've got time to go through everything, but you can read through this document in your own time and get in touch if you have any questions about this stuff. But I've grouped them into these 6 high-level categories of idea, and the first 5 are really oriented around base motivating factors for, like, why would people demand create demand, or like have demand for carbon credits and retirements. And it really comes down to fundamental, you know, human behavior and what motivates humans. So we all know that financial opportunity is a great motivator, especially in crypto. So that's the one I'll go into first, but then I'll talk about these other ones. So if a mechanism can be designed which offers people or organizations some kind of benefit, and there's climate action involved, then we've found that, you know, that's a really compelling way of getting people to take climate action. They're making money and they're helping the planet alongside. What's not to like? And, you know, financial opportunity, if you've spent any time in the crypto space, you'll be aware of all kinds of different financial opportunities that people are experimenting with. So it's a question of seeing if we can combine some of those with climate action. So there's a couple of ideas here. I don't think I'll go into the second one too much, but the first one is actually a continuation of what happened at the last DevCon in Bogota. And it was pretty cool what happened, and it was almost incredibly cool what happened, but we ran out of time, and since then we haven't had a chance to resurrect this project until now. So, and we have more time this time. I mean, admittedly, DevCon is pretty close, but the idea here, and then I'll explain the timing. The idea is encourage people who are traveling to DevCon to counterbalance the footprint of the emissions from their flights. And critically, we figured it wasn't enough to just say, please offset your flights. I mean, that happened, and some people did, which was great. I think we had about a 4% uptake, which matches, you know, roughly what you see globally in terms of, you know, how many people offset flights. But we wanted to test whether by offering extra perks for doing it would be enough to get more people offsetting their flights. And the idea that we came up with very late in the day, it was actually only on, I think, we were already beyond halfway through DevCon at that point, was, well, how about we can offer the perks of VIP lunch lanes so that, you know, you can get your food at lunch at DevCon a lot quicker, because, you know, there's thousands of people there, and normally you have to wait in queues, which is a bit annoying. So, and we managed to collaborate with the DevCon team, who very kindly set up a VIP lunch lane for anyone who had a POAP that proved that they had used Toucan, and specifically this project called Discarbon, to offset their flights. So Discarbon is an app that lets you basically figure out, you know, what were the emissions of your flight to DevCon, and then make it easy to offset that through DeFi. Just, you know, connect your wallet, pay a bit of stable coins, and buy some tokens and retire them, and then you get the POAP to prove that you've done all that. So yeah, basically within 24 hours last DevCon of having the idea to do that, we managed to get it up and running because we already had all the tech there. And so for the final Friday, I think it was, we had this VIP lunch lane, and we had quite a lot of people through it, which was cool. But, you know, we should have run it for the whole week, and even for the registration queues at the beginning, which are often the worst. You know, sometimes DevCon registration can take quite a long time. So the idea is basically to resurrect this project, and the code already exists, and it would just be a question of bringing it up to date and then working with the DevCon team and, you know, doing all the kind of viral marketing and whatever you can to get people to offset their flight, or the DevCon attendees. But there's potential for building extra tech on top. You know, we could have leaderboards to see like who's offset the most. You could group it by community, say, you know, which of all the people attending DevCon, you know, which layer 2 or which DAO has made the most contributions or whatever, and you could gamify it. There's lots of potential there. So I can, you know, give more details about that for anyone who's interested, but I think that would be a really fun and revealing experiment to run to see whether perks offered for counterbalancing your carbon emissions can have an impact and get people more involved. So this one is quite a crazy new idea. And I don't know if anyone has seen the there's a website called, I think, 1 Million Pixels, that was just built by one guy for fun, and he it's essentially like a global whiteboard of pixels that can be just black or white, and you just go to the website and it's just like a million, oh sorry, so a million checkboxes, 1 million checkboxes I think it's called, and you go to the web page and there's a million checkboxes, and you can just toggle them on or off. And he just built it kind of as for fun, as a joke, but then people figured out a way of actually drawing art on these checkboxes at scale, and it came into a whole thing. And people realized, oh, this is actually essentially a global whiteboard, which could be used for, anything, and with obviously a meme type component. So the idea here is that you could do a version of that, but to some extent monetize it, have some tokenomics behind purchasing pixels. Maybe you have some free pixels, maybe some are purchasable for commercial reasons, a mix of the two. And it's like a novel form of advertising, essentially, and the monetization drives climate action through the various Toucan tokens. So there's a whole bunch more details on that, and I actually have to fix this link at the moment. It's accidentally private only, so if you click on that at the moment, it doesn't actually work, but I will fix that after the workshop, and you can you'll be able to see more details about that if you're interested. Okay, so let's move on to virtue signaling and branding. So away from financial opportunity, people and organizations are interested in taking action that they believe is the right action to take, and then sharing that they've done that with the rest of the world. Obviously, if you believe you've done something good, then you can benefit from telling other people about it, especially as an organization. And if you're competing with other organizations in your space and you want to show that you're more green than the competition, then this is a good way of doing it. So this is a kind of high-level idea without going into real specifics, but there's a lot of potential for gamification here, and leaderboards or some kinds of ways of measuring climate impact through measurement of retirement of these tokens gives opportunities for gamification, where you can see who's taking the most climate action, and how's the competition doing, and so on. And I want to draw a parallel here. Actually, maybe I'll just open it up and just show you. So the Protocol Guild this is nothing to do with climate action whatsoever, but it's a really nice example of how public goods can be funded, and there is kind of an element of gamification here. So essentially, the Protocol Guild is about raising funds for development of the Ethereum core infrastructure at the protocol level. And so there's a bunch of engineers, developers around the world who are working on that, and they need to be funded for it. And the desire is to fund this work in a more decentralized way. So you have all these organizations and individuals that have pledged to donate certain amounts of their own token supply, for example, here. But then we've also got donations in stable coins, and you can see here's a donor leaderboard. This is actually a mixture of organizations and individuals. I see we've got Anthony Susano at number 19, which is super cool, very impressive donations. You can see donations by chain. So this is almost like different chains competing to see who can contribute the most. And so this obviously makes Arbitrum look great here, because and Optimism, like, look how much they're contributing, and same for the others. And so you can see here more about donations and individual donations and so on. So it's kind of a bit gamified. It's obviously not a game, but leaderboards are one interesting thing to think about here. And I think that the point is that the same could be done for climate action on chain, right? Or something similar. So hopefully that gives food for thought. And then that kind of leads on to the next one, which is sense of community. And you saw it there to some extent, that you have organizations appearing on the leaderboard. Now, okay, those pledges and donations from big DAOs like Arbitrum and Optimism, those are probably driven, the decisions to contribute in that way are probably driven at the DAO level rather than at the individual level. But you could also have, individual DAO members all contributing to climate action, and then some mechanism that collates all of that data and says, well, everyone within this DAO has, retired this amount of carbon credits. Therefore, the total climate action of this DAO or this community is this much. And now let's compare it to this other community in a similar space and, see who is the most green. So that's essentially what this idea is. It's about using the tribal instincts of people and we know, let's face it, Web3 is an incredibly tribal space. So, tribality, if that is a word, is a really powerful force that shouldn't be underestimated. So imagine if you get layer 2s competing with each other to be the most green, or DeFi protocols or DAOs or countries or cities, or even DevCon side events. You could have a leaderboard where that tracks all retirements relating, on behalf of DevCon side events, and like maybe each side event has a hashtag, and you track like each retirement, has a hashtag of a side event in it, and then you collate the results and show them and see which side events are the most green. So combination of gamification and this harnessing this these tribal instincts and this sense of community is essentially the idea there. Then there is just like people who just want to do the right thing just because they feel good about doing it and they don't need to tell anyone else about it. And so there's not really kind of any external communication that needs to be facilitated in this respect. It's just about making it easier for them personally to take positive climate action. And there is a really cool idea here. And actually it's more than an idea. It's an existing dormant project, which it was started actually by the one and only James Farrell, magnificent human being who used to be on the Toucan team and is instrumental in funding the Commons. And yeah, this is a great idea, and it's just a question of finding someone with the time and energy to pick it up and start working on it and get it working. So the idea here is scan Gmail accounts automatically for flight confirmations. Let's face it, a lot of people use Gmail. A lot of Gmail users fly places. And if you could just press one button and it just scans and figures out where you've flown, calculates the carbon footprint of all of those, and then says, right, if you buy this many credits, then you'll counterbalance those emissions. And you can feel really good that you've removed the CO2 that you've helped remove the CO2 that you put in the atmosphere. Then yeah, that's just making the whole process easier. And so there's a link here to GitHub. The project exists. There's a bunch of code. A few people have worked on it, and it just needs resurrecting essentially. So that's a really interesting one. Now, finally, of all the 6 motivating factors that I've been talking about is this one around regulation and politics. And this is a bit of a tricky one, honestly. And I'm not sure if it applies for this hackathon, but if you can think of ways that it would apply, then great. But the essential idea is that in Web3, we have a bit of a reputational problem in the wider, world generally. That a lot of people don't understand Web3, they don't understand crypto, they don't see the good in it, and all they see is the negative news that dominates the mainstream media cycles whenever they cover crypto, which is, things like FTX and this scam and that scam and so on. And obviously, we in this space know that there's so many fantastic things about what the space brings, but politically, we're not in a good place, and we see huge resistance from US regulators, for example, against the crypto industry, and so on. And so, if we, as the Web3 space, can show that we're engaging in positive climate action, then it can help change that narrative potentially. And politicians can start realizing, oh, wait a second, this crypto thing can actually be used for good. It's not just, a bunch of scammers kind of trying to make a quick buck. So that's the general idea there. But as I said, it may not be so relevant for this hackathon. And finally, so, I've talked about these 6 sort of motivating factors, which are quite intrinsic to human behavior. But the final one is building infrastructure that can facilitate any of these other 6. And there are 3 ideas here of specific things that could be worked on, that are things that essentially, we at Toucan want to work on anyway, but there's only so much we can do at one time. And if other people are interested in helping out with these, then this could be quite powerful. So what is the infrastructure work that could be done? Well, and by the way, I'm sure there's plenty of other stuff. You could, for example, work on just leaderboards alone would be an interesting infrastructure play. But the first one is that we have this smart contract called the Offset Helper. Needs to be renamed, to be honest. Don't get too hung up on the name, but it essentially makes it really easy to retire credits on chain. And the key value add that it has is that you can pay for retirements with any token, and it will just automatically swap the tokens that you put in. It will just put them through a DEX, swap them to the Toucan credits, and then do a retirement, and it's all done in one go. And it just, from an on-chain developer perspective, it makes that whole process simpler by bundling it up into one transaction. But the thing is, that was written quite a while ago, and we haven't yet added support for CHAR, which is our liquid pool token for on-chain carbon removals. And by the way, I've just realized I forgot to talk about biochar, which is the form of removals that we're focused on at the moment. And I do have, sorry, this is completely out of sequence, but just as a quick diversion, I've got a nice diagram here of this 6 common types of carbon dioxide removals that are out there. Everyone knows the one relating to trees, afforestation and reforestation. That's the first thing everyone thinks of in the carbon space. But then there's 5 others listed here, and I'm sure this is not a complete list. But specifically, biochar is the one that our char pool is focused on. So that basically we are tokenizing biochar credits from Puro and combining them into this pool, and the pool token is called char. And what is biochar? It's when you take biomass, it could be from trees or from crops or organic material, and you partially burn that in the absence of oxygen. So rather than the burning releasing CO2, it's actually locking it into the byproducts of the process. And so charcoal is a form of biochar that everyone is aware of. But yeah, you essentially end up with this product, which actually it's not something you then just bury, but it has its own use. It turns out that biochar is incredibly useful in agriculture. You can put it on soil and it helps in all kinds of ways. So it's useful in itself, as well as just being a way of locking CO2 into the earth. And this has biochar has excellent permanence. So you can basically guarantee that you've locked CO2 into the soil or into the ground, or wherever you put it for 1,000 years or more. And it's a very reliable form of removal. And if you contrast that with, I mean, trees are great. Everyone loves trees. Definitely don't want to take away from the potential of trees for carbon removal, but you do have a bunch of risks with trees. You could just have a forest fire, for instance, or you could just have, some group comes along and does a bunch of illegal logging, and and then all of a sudden those trees are gone. So the permanence side is difficult. So this is why we think biochar is really interesting, and there is a young but growing market for it. So sorry about that misplaced aside, but I thought it'd be worth covering quickly. So back to the offset helper. As I said, it currently only works with some older tokens, NCT and BCT, and doesn't support char. And so this would be probably a pretty easy thing to do and very valuable to have support there. Yeah, and it would additionally be eligible for our, the 20K per ton bounty. So any char that you manage to retire through the offset helper would be eligible for that. So then the next one is more complex and quite interesting, is that until now, I've just talked about retirement as something that you just take a certain number of tokens, of TCO2 tokens, and you retire them, and you claim the environmental impact, and that's a simple process. But what I haven't mentioned is that with the Puro TCO2s, because the Puro registry and actually registries in general only allow retiring in whole ton amounts, that's quite a limiting factor in the case of biochar, because biochar is one of the more expensive types of carbon credit. Removals in general are more expensive than avoidance credits. And so a typical price for a ton of biochar is, I mean, it varies obviously as the market varies, but at the moment it's, I think, around 160 or so. Could be 150, 170, whatever, but in that ballpark. And the point is that even if you want to retire 1 ton, that's already more than some retail customers would be willing to pay for a credit. And if you take the case of a short haul flight, it is quite likely less than 1 ton of CO2 emissions. It's probably more in the measured in kilograms than tons. So to address this problem, we've built a new mechanism, and it is in the early stages, but it's a fractional retirement mechanism. And Michalis, who's on the call, deserves a huge amount of credit for all the work he's done on this. We're pretty excited about it, but this is actually probably the first time that we're talking about it in public, I think. So the idea here is that, as it sounds like, instead of having to retire whole tons one at a time, you can retire fractions of a ton, and suddenly that that arguably is maybe the first time that it's been possible for anyone to retire carbon removal or fractions of carbon removals. And by anyone, I mean literally anyone who's willing to, or anyone in Web3 who's willing to set up a wallet and learn how to do it. So as I've written here, this could unlock countless new retail-oriented use cases. Traditionally, the use cases for carbon credits has been much more at the organizational level, like large companies who want to, they have an ESG policy and they want to make sure that as an organization they are taking climate action in an appropriate way. But obviously, a large organization is going to have a large budget. But what about just individuals who want to do the right thing, like offsetting flights and so on? And I think that this is one of the areas that for me is quite interesting when you combine climate action with Web3 and cryptocurrency and smart contracts, is that you can build new mechanisms that give normal people, I mean, is it right to call us in the Web3 space normal? We're still slightly ahead of the curve. Everyone talks about the Web3 bubble, but obviously our goal is for Web3 to be something eventually that is used by everyone, just in the same way that there were early users of the web back in the 90s, and now these days everyone uses it without thinking about it. So if everyone's going to be on chain in the future, and if we can provide retail mechanisms for carbon credits, then that could be really interesting. And this is only possible with this fractional retirement mechanism. So let's see how we're doing for time. I think I don't. Yeah, I think I'll skip diving kind of deep into the mechanism of fractional retirements, because it is linked here. This is a link to new documentation we have on it. But I'm very happy to answer questions from anyone who wants to learn more about that. We've just deployed it to base Apollio, so it's not even on our other test nets yet, but that should be coming soon, and we can have it on mainnet. I mean, if somebody is working on this during the hackathon, then we can accelerate that and make sure it's available for people who need it. But this, yeah, it's a really interesting mechanism. And finally, yeah, this is, so if there's anyone out there who has a Solidity background and maybe a mathematical background and wants some kind of more juicy technical challenge, then this portfolio retirements idea is a really interesting one. And I won't go into that now either, but you can read it there. And if this piques your interest, then get in touch and we can give you more details. Okay, so wrapping it up, essential info, you probably know this already. I'm sure you found the Dora Hacks page. As I said, our documentation covers everything, hopefully well, and if it doesn't, then get in touch and ask us questions. Our app is here, so you can use that for quickly playing around with the protocol. You can get on the test nets in the app. You just have to click a checkbox at the top right, and it'll give you access to switch to those. And if you need test tokens, we do have a faucet, but unfortunately it's not in the greatest shape at the moment. So it's probably easier if you just get in touch and say, hey, send me some test tokens. Yeah, and speaking of that, how do you get in touch with us? Well, you can reach us on the Funding the Commons Telegram groups. If you mention me or Michalis, you can get our attention there, or you can also join the Toucan Discord if you're not already in it, and we monitor that as well. So hopefully those are enough ways to get in touch. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. Now, I see we actually have had a couple of people join, so if there are any questions of any nature at all, I'd be happy to take those now. Let me just check the chat. Okay, no questions. Otherwise,
Thank you, for hosting. I actually do have a question. There are many different bounties of the hackathon. We have obviously tracks by Stellar, Near, Astral, and many more. So I'm wondering, have you thought maybe about, like different ways Toucan innovation could be connected with any of those, and would you encourage builders to explore those connections a little bit?
Oh, I love that question. I would definitely encourage builders to explore that. I have to admit, I haven't thought about it in depth myself. I have looked at the other challenge tracks. I know. Let's see if I open up the page, maybe see if anything immediately springs to mind. So we've got financial inclusion, decentralized AI, decentralized storage. Well, so decentralized storage, I mean, Filecoin are very good friends of ours, and we have uh, collaborated with them a bit and, talked a lot about the role of decentralized data in the climate space. Um, and I think there is huge potential here, but it's still very early days. And essentially, the idea is that, you remember, like at the beginning of the talk, I talked about verified carbon credits, and the importance of the word verified in that is that, it hides a myriad of complexity around how do you verify carbon credits, how do you make sure that they represent real positive climate action, whether it's removals or something else. Um, and that verification process relies extremely heavily on data, right? And there's far more data in that process than could ever be put on chain, or at least not on the chains that we're used to at the moment. And this is where, storing that data on public decentralized storage, where it can be viewed and analyzed and verified by anyone, is obviously a better world to live in, rather than just trusting certain centralized entities to do the verification and then hope that they do a good job of it. And indeed, we have unfortunately seen cases in the carbon space where, validation and verification bodies have, they've verified things according to the methodologies, but then they've missed details maybe around how, like, the carbon project actually has a negative impact on local communities. Or that the data hasn't been collected in the right way, or it hasn't been analyzed in the right way, or there's been assumptions that have gone wrong, or whatever. So decentralizing that and democratizing it, and exposing that whole process to more transparent scrutiny is really important. There's I would love to be able to say that we've done more in that space so far, but the essential problem is that, like, that's on that whole space is on the supply side of carbon credits, and at the moment we're more concerned about demand, because if there's not enough demand, then you've got all this great supply that has nowhere to go, and there's no funding for it. And we need the funding to grow the supply side, but that funding has to come from the demand side, which is why our hackathon challenges is focused more on the demand side for now. But I do see tremendous potential by marrying these technologies together. So that's one answer. Public goods, funding infrastructure in general. I mean, of course, this is climate action. It's public goods funding is absolutely needed for all kinds of climate action. Identity and privacy is critical to any mechanism that involves multiple players. So I think there's potential there, and the same for governance. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton of synergies across all of these. Even financial inclusion, you have small carbon projects in, developing countries that need, they then maybe don't have access to traditional banking infrastructure and so on, and they need that support. So yeah, I think there's a lot of synergies. I apologize for not having thought about that more in advance, but happy to ideate with anyone who wants to talk about potential synergies. We're happy to support. That's a great question. Thanks for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for hosting, Adam. I think there's a lot of great inspiration here. And I saw in our Discord that there's some builders building the climate track. And I think that there's also a build submitted around it already. So yeah, super excited to seeing what everyone builds.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, to you and the team for organizing this amazing event, and excited to see the results.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye.